You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and you know what time it is. We have another show lined up for y'all, and guess what? We have a special guest. If you know anything about dental, well, press the pause button because we have a true expert on today. Today, we have Dr. Edward Feinberg. He has an amazing website that you need to go check out, theonwardprogram.com. I want to say to you, Dr. Feinberg, thank you for your time today. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. I know you're super busy. Your resume and portfolio is super long. Probably take me a couple of days just to get through everything. So for our audience, kind of share with us a little bit about your background, your professional world.
Okay. I have a very unusual journey in the dental profession. I grew up in dentistry, and my father was a master and pioneer of full mouth reconstruction and crown and bridge dentistry. And I learned everything from him. And the techniques that he taught me are completely different from the techniques that are currently being taught in the dental schools. I have 100,000 pictures of crown and bridge cases that go back to 1950, all the teeth prepared and handled the same way, and the cases followed for decades with x-rays. So I can show cases in the mouth that I did in the mouth 30 and 40 years with very little changes in the x-rays. And very few dentists have anything like this that they could possibly show. So I know I'm on solid ground with handling crown and bridge work for natural teeth. And what I'm seeing is a lot of dentists, a lot of my colleagues are having a great deal of difficulty with crown and bridge. They're having crowns falling out, which they're not supposed to, and they're having decay under their crowns. These problems were solved in the 1930s. And somewhere in the 1970s, the dental educators decided to teach techniques that they thought would be easier for the students to accomplish. But they didn't realize that the new techniques that they were teaching actually violate the basic principles that allow my dad and I to have so much success. So there are a lot of dentists who are extracting teeth that I could save very easily and in order to place implants.
When you look at the different ways of technology and how that affects how business are being run, what are some of the things that you and your father noticed with technology and how it can be useful running your business?
Well, technology, I love technology. I'm not one of those Luddites who doesn't like technology, but I look at it through the lens of basic principles. And if technology conforms to basic principles that I believe in, then that's good technology. But if it doesn't matter how cool it is not good in technology, and it is not an advancement. So there's a very good example. There's a machine that mills all ceramic crowns out of a block of ceramic material. And this is crowns in a day. That's what that is. So typically, in order to prepare a tooth for that type of restoration, you would put a ledge on the tooth, and then you would make your ceramic crown to the ledge. There's always an opening. They cannot be sealed at the micron level where bacteria live. And we knew about this in the 1960s because although the technology to make one of these things is very cool, the end product is no different than the old high-fusing porcelain crowns that were baked in an oven in the 1960s. So you think we didn't know what was wrong with those things then? And so here some company comes along and they want to sell these $100,000 machines to dentists. And because a lot of the young professionals do not know where dentistry came from, they're very easy prey for this. And the patients think it's very cool. Oh, I can have my crown done in one day. And they don't realize that this is not likely to hold up long term, and that there are a lot of things wrong with it. When I make crowns, I make them on the model of the mason jar cover, which is the best known thing ever devised for preserving food. And so I almost never get decay under my crowns, even in a patient who's highly susceptible to decay. And I don't have crowns falling out either. And in fact, I let all my patients wear the dentistry on a trial basis with Vaseline or something like a rubber or silicone, just to make sure everything's perfect before I cement it in permanently and they do not fall out. And I've also treated a lot of teeth that are completely flush with the gum and have nothing sticking up above the gum. And I don't build them up. I don't put posts in them. I don't do fancy orthodontic procedures on them. And I don't do extensive bone surgery around them either, because I have a completely different paradigm than what's being taught. So while the dental schools are focusing on tooth structure that's above the gum, I couldn't care less about any tooth structure above the gum. I care about what's below. So, when they build a building, they put the foundation in the ground and then they build the building on top of the foundation. And that's what I look at. I look at the foundation, which is the bone and the roots. So if a patient has good bone and good roots, that's a good candidate for crown and bridge work. So a lot of these teeth are being extracted because the dentists do not know how to restore them. And it's very sad because my dad's teacher did this. And when you think about it, it goes back to the beginning of the 20th century, and that my area of the profession went off in a different direction, and patients are the ones to suffer because as good as implants are when they're used appropriately, they have a lot of things wrong with them. There are people who are not good candidates for implants. And there are also patients who may not want them. They should have choices. So most of the time when you go to the lectures, what you see is not a perfect mouth with a tooth where a tooth happens to be missing. That would be a perfect place to place an implant. What you see are the teeth around the space that they want to put the implant in falling apart. They either have big fillings or decay or their crowns or they're going to need crowns. That patient would be far better off with bridge work that does something good for the entire area. If you know how to do good crown and bridge work, you could bring the forces up close to the bone. You can minimize the forces on the bone, and then that's the end of the patient's problem. An implant will only fill a space and does nothing for the teeth around it. So the patients are really being shortchanged. Their problems are never solved. And I don't think that's right. I think that for the majority of cases, bridge work is a much better choice. And the problem, as I mentioned, is a lot of dentists do not know how to do good bridge work. That is the real problem, in my opinion.
Once again, listen, I'm Refocus Radio, talking to our special guest, Dr. Edward Feinberg. And my next question for you is, when it comes to how it's determined whether a save of a tooth is necessary versus a extraction, what's some ways that a person who's listening to this can kind of know for themselves before they get in a situation and maybe be misguided?
Well, the first thing I would say to patients is, it's very common, or patients accept that if they get medical diagnosis and treatment plan that they don't like, they're very accepting of going to another person to get a second opinion. But that's not so true in dentistry. Usually they'll just do whatever the dentist says. And we're not all the same. We don't have all the same skills. So I think I would encourage them that if they don't like what their dentist said, and maybe they should find somebody who might be able to help them. Because if one dentist can't save teeth, maybe another one can. And I break my neck to try to save the teeth because I think you can always take them out and do implants if worst comes to worst. And I've seen a lot of miracles. I've had patients come to me, with teeth that are loose, and most dentists would say, oh, they have to be extracted. And a lot of times when you set up the mouth properly, and you compensate for all of the things that are wrong and you remove the destructive forces, they tighten up and then you can save the teeth. I've done a lot of that. And most dentists don't even know that can be done. And so patients should have choices, I think. I'm not so quick. I sometimes want to see what nature's going to give me, and then we could make a choice. So I'm not in a hurry to extract teeth. And the other thing I don't like is what I'm seeing now is a trend toward overly invasive treatment. So one of the things that a lot of dentists are doing are pulling out all the teeth on an arch, either the upper or the lower or both, and putting 4 implants in and making these cases called all on 4. And typically what they do is they screw in a denture into these implants, and they are overloading these implants with big superstructures. And when you go to the lectures, they never show you follow-up. So I always show, as I mentioned, follow-up, So you see the aesthetic result, which is very nice, usually on the day of insertion, and you have no idea if the patient was comfortable or how that case lasted. I don't think that's right at all. I think we should have at least 5 years of follow-up to determine if that's something we should do for patients. And I also don't believe in doing drastic treatment or changing the restorative type drastically for patients. I believe in easing them into major changes rather than doing something drastic and invasive, because that's very difficult, not only physically for the patients, but psychologically. And you can ease them in. The problem is it's not that lucrative and it interferes with workflow. So there's a very big emphasis now on workflow and economics when it should be health and longevity. And that's how I was trained, and that's what I believe in. So I ask myself when I get a patient, if I had to set this problem, is this something I would do for myself? I think that's a very good yardstick. And I think people sometimes forget these are human beings sitting in your chair. They have to navigate socially and they have to be comfortable. And, I think they forget about that. And you don't always know with some of these treatments, I think some of them are experimental, whether or not they're actually going to work. I've seen them, screw in these dentures into implants and there's no way of cleaning around them. How do you keep them clean? I would never design anything like that. And I'm against that. And the experts tell you not to do that. But it's being done, and it's being done by some very high level people. And then the average person the average dentist who is just getting their feet wet with this stuff thinks that's okay. And this is what's going on. And so that's why I think it's so important for me to get my message out there, because, we know this is true in medicine. You have to be your own doctor in a way and try to do for yourself what's best for you. And I would have to say the same thing is true in dentistry, and not to be afraid to ask questions and to take your time rather than to do invasive treatment. There's no emergency. No one's going to die in dentistry. That's true. And they have choices, and it's up to them to figure out what choice is best for them. And as dentists, doctor means teacher. My job is to let them know what's good, what's bad, what the choices are, what I would recommend, and then, help them with whatever they want to do, not to push them into treatment.
You mentioned about the dentures, and that really piqued my interest because I've heard about that, and I think you've seen that. We all probably seen on social media, screw the dentures in and replace all your teeth. My question for that, and disclaimer, I'm a student. I'm not an expert in this. That's why we have Dr. Feinberg on the show. What are some potential risks that could happen to a person that goes that route, without scaring the audience too much? But from your professional opinion, what's some risks that could be in there?
Well, implants are feats of engineering. And in the engineering world, there are major disasters, bridges and buildings that collapsed because they made a mistake or they didn't calculate the forces that were going to be acting on these structures. Well, the same thing happens in the mouth. So if, let's say, you can't put the implants in deep enough because there are anatomical structures in the way, then you have to take that into consideration when you design the restoration. If you overload them, they will fail like any other engineering structure. So that's very, very important. And there was a very famous dentist who recently passed away. His name was Dr. Carl Misch, who had a stress treatment theorem and outlined what you should do to minimize the forces on these implants. And he was absolutely right. That's what I've always tried to do with crown and bridge. And what I see with crown and bridge and with implants is that both the natural teeth and the implants are being overloaded. with restorations that are too big and something's going to give. And usually the implants are going to go. That's what's going to happen. And natural teeth, they'll either wear or they'll also fail with bone loss. Those are the two things that go wrong in human beings. So you have to take those things into consideration and remove all the destructive forces. In 1964, this famous dentist, Dr. Thomas Ford, said, force-induced degeneration must be treated with scientifically proven engineering principles. And that's true for no matter what you want to do in the mouth. So everything I do is designed to try to minimize the forces on the bone and the roots, or the bone and the implant fixtures. That is really a good rule of thumb. So overloading structure, these fixtures with fixed bridge work is a recipe for disaster. And they are happening, because I've seen those patients. And I've seen patients go through implant treatments multiple times and have the same result, because the dentistry is oversized and they can't place the fixtures deep enough or enough of them that they can minimize the forces that are acting on those structures.
Once again, listen on Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, Dr. Feinberg. You can go to his website, is theonwardprogram.com. When you look at your 40 years plus of experience, what were some ways that you tried to, in your career, to prioritize saving people's teeth, and maybe also what some recommendations you have given to your patients for lifestyle and how that affects?
Well, I was brought up very differently. There were no implants when I started in practice. So the implants didn't come to this country until the early 80s. And so my dad, in his day, he broke his neck to save teeth wherever possible, especially the lower teeth, because the worst restoration in dentistry is the lower denture. Dentistry does not know how to make a good lower denture, because the muscles of the tongue and the cheek continually lift it up. And almost nobody's happy with those restorations. In fact, that's the only time I push people or try to push people into doing implants, is if they have no lower teeth, because there really isn't anything else for those patients. But otherwise, they do have choices. One of the things that comes from dentistry's roots is the double tilt precision attachment case, which I wrote a textbook on that's available on Amazon, along with my other book, Open Wide, which I just published last year, and that's a collection of issues. But in any case, the double tilt precision attachment case worked on the worst teeth you ever saw, and was a great solution for patients who weren't good candidates for fixed bridge work to restore their entire arches. And it works fantastic with implants. So we have cases on implants where we put 3 in the front and stay away from all the bad anatomy, which is usually in the back of the mouth, and make a precision attachment case, a precision attachment partial denture to replace all the missing back teeth. And it functions differently from everything else, because it doesn't put any stresses on the teeth that it's carrying the load of the partial. So the angle of how you take it in and out is tilted in 2 directions. That's why it's called the double tilt precision attachment. And so if the stress is applied to it, it can move slightly to relieve the stress, but it can't come out. Those cases last longer than any other kind of case. And I'm amazed at the worst teeth you ever saw, it works on. So if you have 3 good, strong implants, that's a great case. And you're not going to overstress the implants and yet restore the entire arch. Almost nobody in the dental profession knows anything about it. And that was invented in 1906. I think that's terrible. And I don't know how you change people's attitude or towards learning something completely different, because they're not open-minded. You know, when I got out of school, my colleagues and we couldn't learn enough. We knew nothing. And we broke our necks to continue learning, because your education really starts the day you graduate. In dental school, they can only really give you a rudimentary foundation. And a lot of dentists think they know everything when they get out of school. And that's terrible, coupled with the fact that they get out of school these days with huge debts. They can get out of school with debts of $500,000. And we didn't have that. So when I started working with my dad, there was no push to do production. He wanted me to do quality and take my time and do it right. And as I became better, I became faster. That's not what happens today. Today, the new graduates are pushed into a production mindset. They never become good. They never like the profession, and they never give anything back. And that is not good for the profession or the public. And so I'm trying to make an impact, and it's very difficult to get people to listen to me. But I know I'm right, and I know that we're going in the wrong direction. And that's why I like doing all these podcasts, because I think people should understand what's going on, and maybe we can turn this ship around. But it isn't all areas of my profession. It's my area of the profession. So endodontics and orthodontics, they made huge strides since I graduated from dental school. I'm amazed at the advancements, and those are true advancements. Whereas my area of crown and bridge, the advancements really aren't advancements because they violate basic principles. There are some exceptions, like scanning and milling is accurate, but you can't scan exclusively and say, oh, I only do digital, because you cannot do the same kind of work. That hasn't been invented yet. A scanning machine that can scan the entire root surface below the gingiva and above the bone has not been invented. So that has to be done by making models the old-fashioned way. Then you could scan the models in the computer and design things digitally. There's a lot of problems with how laboratories design things, both analog and digital. They don't know what they're doing, and they make out like they do because, oh, look at how many cases I made. That's meaningless to me, because most of the dentistry is oversized. And like, for example, if you're preparing natural teeth for crown and bridge work, the most you could take off a vital tooth is 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters. So if you don't want to put back more than that, I try to put back less, which means you have to pay very, very close attention to detail, and you have to measure everything carefully so that you're not making these too big. So if you went into any dental laboratory and you measured the crown and bridge that was there, you'd be horrified. These things are too big. That's going to overstress the foundation. And a lot of them are likely to have periodontal problems. And nobody gives that a second thought. That's not how I was raised in dentistry. So I know the difference. And that's why I have the teaching website, so that I can teach dentists how to do good crown and bridge work. I think it's very important that that's there for the future. Otherwise, it's all going to go by the wayside. And I don't want that to happen. I've seen that happen to some of my other colleagues who were way ahead of their time, and they weren't embraced by the profession, and everything they did went by the wayside. That is really sad. You really hope that we're really, really, truly advancing, and that we're making things better. That isn't really always true. And I hope that we can turn things around. So I'm not willing to give up on my profession.
Once again, listen on Refocus Radio. Listen to this show. We're always going to have a fun guest. This was a masterclass with our guest today, Dr. Edward Feinberg. People can go to your website. It's real easy, theonwordprogram.com. Can't believe we're already out of time, but in these closing remarks, what we would like to share with our audience, maybe some words of wisdom for our audience to the next time they go see their dentist appointment and check out their teeth.
I would say don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you're not satisfied with the answers, then don't be afraid to ask somebody else what their opinion is. I think that's really good advice. It's something I would look, probably the better practitioners are going to be the old timers, not the new timers. That's my feeling, because the young professionals don't know where the profession came from and don't have the track record that the older professionals have. So that would be a suggestion. It's not like I like my younger colleagues. I do. I'm very involved in the Dental Association. I've met a lot of wonderful people and we're all working together. But this is what I see. And I've been around long enough. And I know they haven't been around long enough. And a lot of them, really don't understand where the profession came from and what can be done in dentistry. They really have no background. It isn't their fault, but that's the way it is. It's unfortunate.
Well, once again, talking to our guest, Dr. Edward Feinberg, like always, I want to say thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.